She fell asleep on the wrong train and woke up beside the man who changed her life. 10:17 p.m. The warning chime echoed through Portland Union Station. Doors closing. A young woman sprinted down the platform, weaving through the last few passengers. She wasn't carrying a suitcase. No rolling luggage, no shopping bags. Only a small navy blue backpack clutched tightly against her chest. Just before the doors slid shut, she slipped inside the last outbound train. The doors closed behind her. She barely noticed. Her breathing was uneven. Her hair had fallen loose from its ponytail. There was a faint coffee stain on the sleeve of her jacket. She glanced down the nearly empty carriage, found the first available window seat, and collapsed into it. She rested her head against the cool glass, closed her eyes. Less than a minute later, she was asleep. 40 minutes passed. The train rolled into its final station. The announcement echoed softly through the carriage. This is the last stop. All passengers, please exit the train. People gathered their coats, picked up their bags, stepped onto the platform. Within minutes, the carriage was empty. Almost. Near the back sat one remaining passenger, a man quietly reading a worn hardcover novel. The cleaning crew stepped aboard. One of the attendants noticed the sleeping woman. He smiled. "Sir," the man looked up from his book. "Should we wake her?" The man's eyes drifted toward the young woman. Dark circles rested beneath her eyes. Even in sleep, her fingers still gripped her backpack, as though she were afraid someone might take it away. She looked exhausted. Not the kind of tired a good night's sleep could fix. The kind that settled deep into someone's bones. He watched her for another quiet moment, then gently closed his book. "No," he spoke almost in a whisper. "Let her sleep." The attendant blinked. "You know her?" "No." "Then why?" The man looked back at her. "Because," he paused, "she looks like she hasn't had a real night's sleep in weeks." The attendant followed his gaze, then quietly nodded. "I'll give her a few more minutes." He walked away without another word. The man reopened his book, but he never turned another page. Her name was Lucy Harper, 23 years old, a graphic designer. Creative, kind, the sort of person who apologized when someone else bumped into her. For nearly a year, her entire world had revolved around one place, the hospital. Her mother had been seriously ill. Every morning Lucy went to work. Every evening she drove straight to the hospital. She answered emails from waiting rooms, ate vending machine dinners, learned how to sleep sitting upright beside a hospital bed. Most nights, she didn't sleep at all. That morning, everything had finally changed. The doctor smiled. "Your mother can go home." The words hardly felt real. The entire day disappeared into paperwork, prescriptions, insurance forms, grocery shopping, unpacking medication, and making sure her mother was comfortable again. Only after her mother had finally fallen asleep in her own bed did Lucy quietly leave the apartment. She hadn't planned to go anywhere. She simply needed to breathe. A train arrived. She stepped on, and the moment she sat down, her body decided it had carried enough. The man sitting quietly near the back of the carriage was Nathan Cole, 31, an architect, calm, reserved. Every evening, he took the same 10:17 train home. Every evening, he carried the same old novel. The book's faded cover had long since lost its title. No one at the station had ever seen him reading anything else. People simply assumed it was his favorite book. No one ever asked why, and Nathan never volunteered the answer. Several minutes later, Lucy slowly opened her eyes. She blinked twice. The empty train, the silent station. Her eyes widened. She jumped to her feet. "What?" She looked around in alarm. "Did I get kidnapped?" Nathan looked up from his book. "No." She turned toward him. "No? You slept through the last stop." A train attendant walked past carrying a trash bag and laughed. "In 12 years working this line, I've never seen anyone sleep all the way to the end." He grinned. "Congratulations. You've just set the station record." Lucy covered her face with both hands. "Oh, you've got to be kidding me." She reached for her phone, pressed the power button. Nothing. Battery dead. She sighed. Of course. She couldn't even be surprised anymore. Outside, rain suddenly began pouring against the station windows. Within minutes, the parking lot disappeared beneath sheets of water. Lucy checked the departure board. Every train for the night was gone. The first return service wouldn't leave until after 5 the next morning. She quietly laughed to herself. Not because anything was funny, because sometimes When too many things went wrong at once, laughing was easier than crying. I really picked the perfect night to get stranded. Nathan stood and slipped the old novel into his backpack. I know a cafe. She looked at him. It's open 24 hours. They make good hot chocolate. She hesitated. Every lesson she'd ever been taught warned her not to trust strangers. Yet this stranger had spent nearly 10 minutes protecting her sleep instead of waking her. He hadn't asked her name, hadn't taken advantage of the situation. He had simply waited. Something about that made her feel unexpectedly safe. After a long moment, she nodded. Okay. It was a tiny word. But after spending a year believing she had to carry everything alone, it was the first time Lucy had accepted help from someone she barely knew. The cafe was warm, quiet, almost empty. They sat near the window while rain continued falling outside. Nathan ordered coffee, hot chocolate for Lucy. Neither of them asked about jobs, or salaries, or where the other lived. Instead, they talked about favorite books, bad weather, the strange comfort of late-night trains. The conversation felt surprisingly easy, as though neither of them needed to impress the other. Hours passed almost unnoticed. Eventually, the sky beyond the cafe windows began turning pale blue. Morning had arrived. The first train of the day would leave in 20 minutes. They walked back to the station together. The rain had finally stopped. Everything smelled fresh. As they reached the platform, Lucy smiled. I guess. This is goodbye. Maybe. She looked at him curiously. There is one thing I've been wondering. Nathan waited. She tilted her head. Why didn't you wake me? For the first time that night, a faint smile crossed his face. He looked at her for a long moment, then quietly said, maybe someday. Before Lucy could ask another question, the arriving train pulled between them. The doors opened. Passengers stepped off. When she looked back, Nathan was already walking away, leaving behind nothing but an old mystery, and somehow, Lucy knew that finding the answer had suddenly become far more important than catching the right train. For the next several days, Lucy tried very hard to forget him. She threw herself back into work, answered emails, finished client revisions, picked up groceries for her mother, scheduled doctor's appointments. Life slowly settled into something that almost resembled normal again. Yet every evening, at exactly 10:17 p.m., she found herself looking at the clock without meaning to, without understanding why. It wasn't because Nathan was handsome, although he certainly was. It wasn't because of the late-night cafe, or the hot chocolate, or even the strange conversation that somehow felt easier than talking to people she'd known for years. It was something much simpler. No one, not in a very long time, had looked at her and thought, she needs sleep more than she needs to be on time. That thought refused to leave her. A week later, Lucy made a decision she couldn't quite explain. Instead of leaving work at 6 like usual, she stayed late, answered a few unnecessary emails, reorganized files that didn't actually need organizing. At 9:45, she packed her bag. At 10:05, she walked into Portland Union Station. By 10:17, she was sitting in the same carriage, the same side, almost the same seat. She glanced toward the back of the train, empty, no worn novel, no quiet architect. She smiled at herself. What exactly were you expecting? The train pulled away. She rode all the way home, feeling strangely disappointed. The next evening, she did it again. Still no Nathan. By the third night, Lucy had almost convinced herself she was being ridiculous. Maybe he'd changed jobs. Maybe he'd taken a vacation. Maybe he'd never even rode that train regularly. The doors opened. Passengers stepped aboard. Then, a familiar voice spoke quietly beside her. You're back. She turned. There he was. Same navy jacket and his old backpack. Same mysterious hardcover book tucked beneath one arm, and the same calm smile. She laughed before she could stop herself. So are you. I usually am. He nodded toward the empty seat beside her. May I? I think it's your train too. It probably is. He sat down. Neither of them mentioned the fact that Lucy had spent 3 evenings hoping he would appear. About halfway through the journey, the train attendant walked past. He stopped, looked at Nathan, then at Lucy. A grin slowly spread across his face. Well, there you two are again. Lucy blinked. You remember us? The attendant laughed. It's not every week someone sleeps through the last station. He looked at Nathan. "And it's not every week someone convinces us to let her." He pointed playfully between them. "I'll leave you two alone." As he walked away, he called over his shoulder, "Try not to miss the last stop this time." Several nearby passengers smiled. Lucy covered her face with one hand. "I may never recover from this." Nathan chuckled. "I don't know. I think becoming a local legend has its advantages." "Oh? They'll probably name a bench after you." She laughed so hard she nearly dropped her phone. A few nights later, Nathan suggested stopping by the little cafe again. The waitress recognized them immediately. "The sleepy girl," Lucy groaned. "I was hoping everyone had forgotten." The waitress shook her head. "Not a chance." She smiled at Nathan. "Coffee?" He nodded, then looked toward Lucy. "The usual?" She smiled. "The hot chocolate is becoming a problem." "It's a good problem." Their conversations became surprisingly ordinary. They never discussed salaries. Never asked who earned more. Never compared careers. They talked about favorite childhood cartoons, the smell of rain, terrible apartment cooking, the books they had never finished reading. One evening they spent almost 20 minutes debating whether pineapple belonged on pizza. Another night they laughed over the ridiculous names people gave coffee sizes. Somehow, those small conversations mattered more than impressive stories ever could. Little by little, being together stopped feeling unusual. It simply felt easy. Nearly 2 weeks after they met, Lucy's phone suddenly rang while they were halfway through their drinks. The hospital. Her smile disappeared instantly. She answered before the second ring. "What happened?" She listened. Her face turned pale. "My mom." She stood so quickly her chair scraped loudly across the floor. Without asking a single question, Nathan reached for his jacket. "I'm coming." "You don't have to." "I know." He was already walking toward the door. Rain had started again, not nearly as heavy as the night they first met, but enough to blur the city lights. They reached the hospital together. A nurse greeted Lucy almost immediately. "Don't worry. It was just a brief drop in blood pressure. She's stable. We only wanted to be cautious." The tension left Lucy's shoulders all at once. She closed her eyes. For several seconds, she couldn't even speak. Inside the room, Mrs. Bennet looked embarrassed more than anything else. "I'm sorry. I scared everyone again." "You scared me." Lucy smiled as she adjusted her mother's blanket. She checked the IV, straightened the pillow, refilled the water glass, asked the nurse 3 different questions before finally sitting down. Even then, she kept watching the monitor, making sure every number looked normal. Standing quietly near the doorway, Nathan watched without interrupting. He noticed something Lucy herself never seemed to realize. The moment someone she loved needed anything, she disappeared. Her own hunger, her own exhaustion, her own worries, everything became invisible. Only everyone else mattered. Mrs. Bennet eventually noticed Nathan. She smiled warmly. "You must be the train." Lucy laughed. "Mom, what?" "You've mentioned him." "I have not." "You smile differently when you say Nathan." Lucy immediately changed the subject. Even Nathan couldn't hide his smile. From that night forward, something quietly changed. Nathan never mentioned what he had noticed. He never lectured Lucy about taking care of herself. Instead, he simply started showing up differently. Some evenings there was an extra sandwich waiting on the train. I accidentally bought 2. Other nights he handed her a bottle of vitamins. My office gives these away. When the weather turned colder, he somehow always had an extra cup of hot chocolate. I wasn't sure if you'd already had dinner. He never made a speech, never asked for credit, never even admitted he was doing it on purpose. Lucy noticed. Of course she noticed. But pretending not to became part of their unspoken language. It was easier than saying thank you every single time. One evening, as the train gently rocked through the city, Lucy looked across at Nathan. He was reading again. The same old hardcover book, the same worn corners. She frowned thoughtfully. Day after day, night after night. It was always that book, never another. She watched him quietly turn another page. A question settled gently in her mind. Why was it always the same one? She almost asked. Almost. Instead, she simply looked out the window. Some questions, she realized, were worth waiting for. By the time autumn settled over Portland, neither Lucy nor Nathan could remember exactly when their late-night train rides had become part of everyday life. They never officially made plans. There were no messages asking, "Are you free tonight?" Somehow, at 10:17 every evening, One of them would step onto the train. A few moments later, so would the other. If Nathan boarded first, he always left the window seat beside him empty. If Lucy arrived first, she somehow never chose another carriage. Neither of them acknowledged it. They simply smiled, sat down, and continued whatever conversation had been waiting since the night before. One Saturday afternoon, Nathan invited Lucy to his architecture studio. "I need an honest opinion." She laughed. "That sounds dangerous." It probably is. The studio overlooked Elliott Bay. Sunlight poured through enormous glass windows. Scale models covered every table. Blueprints hung from the walls. Everything looked carefully organized. Everything except Nathan's own desk. Lucy glanced at the mountain of rolled drawings. "I thought architects were neat." "We are. So whose desk is this?" "Mine." She grinned. "I knew it." A few minutes later, Nathan unrolled the largest blueprint on the table. "This is the new Community Arts Center." Lucy leaned over it with complete seriousness. She studied every line, turned the paper sideways, then upside down. Another full minute passed before she looked back at him. "I thought this was a maze." Nathan blinked. "A maze," she pointed confidently. "Look, if I start here. How do I escape?" He tried very hard not to laugh. He failed. Within seconds he was laughing harder than Lucy had ever seen. She folded her arms. "I don't appreciate being mocked." "I'm not mocking you. You absolutely are. I'm just imagining someone trying to solve my building with breadcrumbs." She grabbed one of the pencils from the table. "I'm telling you, someone is getting lost in here." For the next half hour, Nathan abandoned architecture entirely and attempted to explain floor plans using coffee cups, sugar packets, and cookie crumbs. Lucy remained unconvinced. When she finally left the studio, she patted him sympathetically on the shoulder. "I still think it's a maze." The weeks passed gently. Some evenings they shared hot chocolate. Some evenings they walked slowly through downtown Portland after getting off the train. Sometimes they wandered along the waterfront until the city grew quiet around them. Sometimes they sat on a park bench saying almost nothing at all. Neither of them rushed the silence. Neither tried to define whatever this was becoming. It wasn't friendship anymore. Not exactly. But it wasn't a romance either. Not yet. It simply felt safe for both of them. One chilly Thursday evening, Lucy boarded the train looking more tired than usual. She had spent the entire afternoon helping her mother organize follow-up appointments. She smiled when she found Nathan waiting in his usual seat. "Long day?" She nodded. "The longest." They talked quietly for a while, about nothing particularly important. A funny customer at work, an elderly couple who insisted on feeding pigeons despite every warning sign, a child who had somehow convinced his parents that broccoli was poisonous. The conversation drifted lazily through the night. Then, Lucy's replies became shorter. She rubbed her eyes. "I'm listening. I know. I'm definitely awake. I believe you." She smiled weakly. 30 seconds later, her head slowly tipped sideways, until it came to rest against Nathan's shoulder. She was asleep. Nathan looked down for just a moment. A loose strand of hair had fallen across Lucy's face. Outside, the city lights drifted silently across the window. The train swayed gently. Instinctively, he adjusted his posture just enough to keep her comfortable. Then he remained perfectly still. One stop passed, then another. Passengers boarded. Others stepped off. The conductor walked through the carriage checking tickets. He smiled the moment he recognized them. Without saying a word, he continued walking. Half an hour passed. Nathan never once reached for his phone, never shifted his shoulder, never attempted to wake her. He simply let the train carry them both through the Portland night. Eventually Lucy stirred. She blinked sleepily before realizing where she was. "Oh." She sat upright immediately. "I did it again." "You did. I'm sorry." "For what?" "I used you as a pillow." He looked thoughtfully at his shoulder. "I've survived worse." She laughed quietly. "Thank you." This time, she didn't ask why. When Lucy stepped off the train a few minutes later, she turned and waved before disappearing onto the platform. The doors closed. The train pulled away. As Nathan settled back into his seat, the conductor approached once more. He smiled knowingly. "You did it again." Nathan looked up. "What?" "You didn't wake her." The conductor chuckled softly before continuing down the aisle. Nathan never answered. Outside the window, Portland slipped quietly into the darkness. Inside the carriage, he opened his book again, but he wasn't reading. Several evenings later, They sat together at the cafe after another train ride. Rain tapped gently against the windows. The waitress already knew their order by heart. Coffee, hot chocolate, no menus necessary. As Nathan reached into his backpack for his book, something slipped free. A small photograph drifted onto the table. Lucy instinctively picked it up. It showed a smiling teenage girl, bright eyes, a baseball cap turned backward, one arm wrapped around a much younger version of Nathan. The smile on his face in the picture was unlike anything Lucy had ever seen. Lighter, completely carefree. She looked from the photograph to him. Who's she? For the first time since they'd met, Nathan's expression changed. Not dramatically, just enough for Lucy to notice. He gently took the photograph back, carefully slid it between the pages of the old book, closed the cover. For a long moment, he simply rested one hand on it. Then he looked at Lucy. A small, almost apologetic smile crossed his face. One day, his voice was quiet. I'll tell you. Nothing more. No explanation. Only those 4 words. Lucy nodded. She didn't ask again. Some answers, she realized, couldn't be rushed. As they left the cafe together later that night, Nathan carried the same old book beneath his arm. The mystery surrounding it felt larger than ever. And somehow, Lucy found herself wanting to know the man behind that quiet smile even more than before. Winter quietly gave way to spring. The hospital visits became less frequent. Mrs. Bennett grew stronger with every passing week. She began taking morning walks around the neighborhood. She insisted on cooking dinner again. Some evenings she even gently pushed Lucy out the front door. Go. I'll survive for 2 hours. You have a train to catch. Lucy would pretend to argue, but they both knew her mother was right. Somewhere along the way, the late-night train had become part of her life. Not because of the route, because of the man waiting somewhere inside it. One Thursday afternoon, an email arrived in Lucy's inbox. She almost ignored it. The subject line read, "Congratulations." She opened it, read it once, then again. She couldn't believe it. 3 months. A fully funded design fellowship in Chicago. The program she had dreamed about since college. The one she had never applied for because life had gotten in the way. She sat motionless for several minutes. When Nathan met her that evening, he knew immediately something had happened. She handed him her phone. He read the email. A slow smile spread across his face. I knew they'd say yes, she laughed softly. I didn't. You should have. She looked down. I'm not sure I should go. He frowned slightly. Why? My mom. My job. She hesitated. You. Neither of them said anything after that. The train continued quietly through the Portland night. News somehow traveled faster than either of them expected. Within 2 days, Nathan's coworkers had reached an outrageous conclusion. So, one of them leaned against his desk. When are you proposing? Nathan looked up from a blueprint. What? Come on, she's leaving. You've obviously got a ring. Another coworker nodded dramatically. You'd better hurry. Nathan simply closed the file in front of him. I already bought something. The office exploded. I knew it. Finally. When's the proposal? What does it look like? Nathan just smiled. You'll see. 3 days later, Lucy met him outside a travel store. He handed her a large wrapped box. She stared at it curiously. You bought me something. I did. She carefully opened the package. Inside was a beautiful navy blue suitcase. Light, elegant, perfect for traveling. She blinked. A suitcase? You'll need one. She looked from the luggage back to him. For one brief second, she had expected something else. Across the street, Nathan's coworkers happened to witness the exchange. One of them dramatically buried his face in his hands. He bought luggage. I really thought it was a ring. Another sighed, the least romantic man alive. A week before her departure, Lucy decided to surprise Nathan. She arrived at the station early, carrying 2 cups of hot chocolate. She smiled as she searched the platform. Then she found him, about 20 yards away. A woman hurried toward Nathan. Without hesitation, she threw her arms around him. He hugged her tightly. Both of them laughed. The woman rested her head against his shoulder for a brief moment. Lucy stopped walking. The warmth from the hot chocolate suddenly disappeared from her hands. She stared for several seconds, then quietly lowered her eyes. Of course, neither of them had ever called this a relationship. Neither had ever promised anything. Why had she assumed otherwise? She slowly turned around. The paper cups suddenly felt heavier than they had a moment ago. She reached the station exit before someone called her name. Lucy. She closed her eyes for a second before turning back. Nathan walked toward her. Concern replaced his smile the moment he saw her expression. Before either of them could speak, the woman hurried over carrying a small suitcase. So, she smiled warmly. You're Lucy. Lucy looked confused. You know me? The woman laughed. I've heard enough stories to recognize you immediately. She extended her hand. I'm Hannah, Nathan's older sister. My flight from London landed an hour ago. Everything clicked into place. Lucy looked at Nathan, then at Hannah, then covered her face with both hands. Oh no, Hannah laughed. You thought I was his girlfriend, didn't you? Lucy groaned. I'd really rather not answer that. Even Nathan couldn't stop smiling. For the rest of the evening, he quietly enjoyed reminding her that assumptions could be dangerous. Departure day arrived. Far sooner than either of them wanted. The familiar station somehow felt completely different, the same announcement echoing overhead. Only this time, Lucy wasn't boarding by accident. She was leaving on purpose. The suitcase Nathan had given her stood beside her feet. She looked at it for a long moment. Then at him. I've been thinking. He waited. She took a slow breath. If I stay, Nathan gently interrupted. Don't. She looked up. He shook his head. Don't stay because of me. Silence settled between them. I've spent my whole life watching people put their dreams on hold. I'm not going to let you do that. She swallowed hard. But what if I miss this? He smiled softly. If you stay, one day you'll wonder who you could have become. I never want to be the answer to that question. He stepped closer. Close enough for only her to hear. Go. Learn. Become the designer you've always wanted to be. Then he smiled. The kind of smile that carried both hope and heartbreak at the same time. Come back when you're happy. Not because you miss me. Those words broke something inside Lucy. Not because they hurt, because they were the purest expression of love she had ever known. He wasn't asking her to stay. He wasn't asking her to choose him. He was protecting the future she had dreamed about long before they met. At that moment, Lucy understood something she had never experienced before. The right person doesn't shrink your world. They quietly help you make it bigger. The boarding announcement echoed through the station. Passengers began lining up. Lucy picked up her suitcase, then stopped. There was still one question. The same question that had been following her ever since the night they met. She looked directly into Nathan's eyes. Please. He waited. Tell me. She took another step closer. Why didn't you wake me? For a long moment, Nathan simply looked at her. Then a small smile appeared. Gentle, almost sad. Next time, the train doors opened. Passengers stepped aboard. Lucy hesitated for one final second, then climbed onto the train. As it slowly pulled away from the platform, she stood by the window watching Nathan grow smaller in the distance. He lifted one hand. She did the same. The station disappeared behind the curve of the tracks. But the question remained. Why hadn't he woken her that night? For 3 more months. Neither Lucy nor the audience would know the answer. 3 months passed. Chicago gave Lucy everything she had once been afraid to want. She learned from designers whose work she had admired since college. She presented ideas in rooms that once would have terrified her. She filled sketchbooks with colors, buildings, faces, and fragments of conversations overheard in cafes. For the first time in years, her life was not organized around hospital schedules or someone else's needs. She was creating again, sleeping again, becoming someone she recognized. Nathan never asked her to come home early. He never made distance feel like punishment. Some nights, he sent a photograph of the empty seat beside him on the 10:17 train. Other nights, Lucy sent him unfinished designs and asked for an architect's opinion. His answers were usually useless. Needs fewer mazes, she always laughed. Neither of them said they were counting the days. They didn't need to. When the fellowship ended, Lucy decided not to tell Nathan exactly when she was returning. She wanted to surprise him. Her mother knew. The airline knew. And, unfortunately, her mother had never been particularly talented at keeping romantic secrets. By the time Lucy's plane landed in Portland, Mrs. Bennett had already called Hannah. Hannah had immediately called Nathan. Neither woman considered this a betrayal. They called it assistance. Lucy knew none of that. She collected the Navy suitcase Nathan had given her and headed toward Portland Union Station. She could have taken a taxi home. Instead, she waited. At exactly 10:17 p.m., she boarded the same familiar train, the same carriage, the same row, the same window seat where she had once collapsed from exhaustion and accidentally changed the direction of her life. This time, she was wide awake. She knew where she was going, and whom she hoped to find. The carriage was almost empty. Nathan was nowhere in sight. Lucy tried not to feel disappointed. Then she noticed something resting on the seat beside the window, a small brown paper bag. Her name was written across the front. She stopped. Slowly, she opened it. Inside was a cup of hot chocolate, still warm. Beneath it lay the old hardcover book Nathan had carried every night since they met. Its cover was faded, its corners worn smooth. Tucked between the pages was an expired train ticket, the ticket from the night Lucy had slept through the last stop. Beside it rested a folded note. She opened it. "Thought you might sleep better on the right train this time." Lucy laughed softly. Then the laughter caught somewhere behind gathering tears. She turned around. Nathan stood near the carriage doors, hands in his coat pockets, the same quiet smile on his face. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Lucy crossed the space between them and wrapped both arms around him. He held her tightly. No hesitation, no careful distance. 3 months collapsed into one breath. "You knew," she whispered. "Your mother is terrible at secrets." Lucy laughed against his shoulder. "She calls it helping. So does my sister. That sounds dangerous." "It is." They sat together as the train began moving through Portland. City lights slid across the dark windows. For several minutes, neither said anything. Lucy held the old book in her lap. The photograph was still inside. The smiling 19-year-old girl was still inside. The mystery Nathan had postponed again and again. Lucy looked at him. "You promised next time." His smile faded gently. "I know." He took the book from her hands. For a long moment, his thumb rested against the worn cover. Her name was Lily. Lucy remained silent. "She was my younger sister." He opened the book to the photograph. Lily stood beside a much younger Nathan, wearing a backward baseball cap and laughing at something outside the frame. She was 19 when she died. His voice remained steady, but Lucy could hear the years of grief beneath it. "The night it happened, she called me. I'd been working for almost 30 hours. I fell asleep on the couch. My phone was beside me, but it was on silent." He looked down at the photograph. "When I woke up, there were 7 missed calls." Lucy's fingers tightened around the edge of her coat. Her car had broken down. She called because she was scared. Before anyone reached her. Nathan stopped. He didn't need to finish. The silence said enough. "For years, I kept thinking that if I had answered, maybe she wouldn't have waited by the road. Maybe she would have stayed in the car. Maybe something would have changed." He closed the book carefully. "After that, I started waking people. Friends who fell asleep on couches, co-workers who stayed too late, strangers who missed their stops. I couldn't stand watching someone sleep when they might be needed somewhere." Lucy remembered every time the conductor had teased him, every time Nathan had let her sleep anyway, the night we met. He looked directly at her. "I almost woke you. I reached for your shoulder, but then I saw your face, the dark circles under your eyes, the way you were holding that backpack even while sleeping. You didn't look careless. You looked," he searched for the right word, "finished. As though the world had taken everything from you and was still asking for more." His voice softened, and I realized that waking you because of my fear would have been selfish. Lucy's eyes filled with tears. "So for the first time since Lily died, I let someone sleep." He gave a small, broken smile. "I didn't know your name. I didn't know where you were supposed to be. I only knew that, for those few minutes, you looked safe." A tear slipped down Lucy's cheek. Not because the story was tragic, but because she finally understood. For almost a year, everyone had needed something from her. Doctors needed signatures. Clients needed designs. Her mother needed care. Her life had become a list of demands. And on one late-night train, a stranger had looked at her and decided she needed nothing except rest. He had protected a few quiet minutes she hadn't known how to protect for herself. Lucy reached for his hand. "Thank you for letting me sleep." Nathan closed his fingers around hers. "Thank you for coming back." He reached into his coat pocket. A small velvet box appeared in his hand. Lucy looked at it, then at him. "The first night we met." He smiled. "I thought you got on the wrong train." The carriage rocked gently beneath them. "It turns out," he opened the box. Inside was a simple, elegant ring. I was the one who found the right one. Before Nathan could kneel, Lucy stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him again. He laughed softly. She looked up through tears. So, can we keep taking the 1017 train? Nathan rested his forehead against hers. As long as... A smile returned to his face. You promised to sleep once in a while. I can try. That's not very reassuring. You knew what you were choosing. I did. And, he held her closer, I'd choose it again. Several weeks later, the 1017 train moved through Portland as it always had. Lucy and Nathan sat in their familiar seats. Her head rested against his shoulder. Across the aisle, another young woman had fallen asleep beside her boyfriend. The young man checked the approaching station and reached toward her arm. Nathan quietly shook his head. Let her sleep. The young man hesitated, then smiled and allowed her to rest. Lucy looked up at Nathan. This time she wasn't sleeping because exhaustion had finally defeated her. She was resting because she knew she was safe, whether her eyes were open or closed. The right person was beside her. The camera slowly pulled beyond the carriage window. The train glided through Portland's glowing night. Some people step onto the wrong train by accident, only to discover it has carried them toward the one person meant to share every journey that follows. Sometimes, love doesn't arrive with grand gestures or perfect timing. Lucy thought she had boarded the wrong train that night, but perhaps the greatest turning points in our lives rarely look like the right decision at first. Sometimes, what feels like a mistake becomes the path that leads us exactly where we're meant to be. You've spent so long taking care of everyone else that you forgot what it feels like to let someone take care of you. Have you ever met someone who made you feel safe enough to finally rest? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to read your story. And if you enjoy the story, don't forget to subscribe to Soul Stirring Stories. Thank you for spending this journey with us, and we'll see you in the next story.